Varys had walked those corridors 1,000 times, listening to the silence of the Red Keep when others slept or drank themselves into oblivion. His soft slippers glided across polished stone, almost as if he were a ghost passing unseen among living men, which was precisely how he preferred it. For years, he had cultivated the notion that he was merely a whisper, an observer. He collected secrets like a magpie hoarding shiny objects, storing them in the labyrinth of his mind until they could be turned to his advantage, or, as he liked to pretend, the advantage of the realm. Yet there was one secret he had guarded more closely than all the rest, a secret so tremendous that to speak it aloud would have shattered the delicate balance of power in Westeros. He had discovered the existence of living dragons beneath King's Landing. He first heard the rumors in the time of King Aerys II Targaryen, whispered by old men in the shadowy alcoves of the Red Keep. They spoke of hidden tunnels that led to vast caverns under the city, once used by Targaryen kings to hide their darkest experiments and obsessions. But no one believed it any longer, or so they claimed. Even Pycelle, who had served for decades, dismissed such tales as ravings of the mad. It was not so easy for Varys, who trusted no one's dismissal, especially not when it came from mouths that often lied for personal gain. He explored on his own, sending his little birds into the bowels of the city with instructions to find anything unusual, and they had found something more incredible than he could have imagined. Decades passed without Varys ever daring to speak of what he had uncovered, for the climate was never right. Robert Baratheon hated Targaryens, and every time Varys even hinted at anything to do with their lineage, he sensed the old king's wrath brewing. When Joffrey sat the throne, he was too dangerous, too unpredictable to be trusted with such a revelation. Cersei was no better. At least with Tommen, there had been a fleeting moment where Varys entertained the possibility that gentler hearts might reign in King's Landing. But Tommen was too easily swayed, and the Queen Regent's cunning dwarfed the Boy King's will. For all those years, Varys carried the knowledge like a hidden blade. It was a sliver of doom, a promise of unstoppable power if harnessed by the wrong hands, or perhaps the right ones. Even so, in the aftermath of the wars and the chaos that followed the rise and fall of Queen Cersei, in the swirl of Targaryen reemergence with Daenerys Stormborn, in the tense, uncertain times as Jon Snow's true parentage came to light, amid all of these monumental changes, still Varys kept silent about the beasts he had stumbled upon. He had seen what one grown dragon could do to a city, and he did not wish to unleash that horror unless there was no other choice. But the choice was never his alone to make. The realm was in disarray, and alliances shifted like sand under the tides. Daenerys' attempt to take King's Landing had ended in fire and blood, though events played out differently in each telling. Some claimed the Dragon Queen was merciful at the last moment, sparing tens of thousands. Others spoke of a city destroyed by Dragonflame. The truth, as always, was complicated and found somewhere in between. Daenerys Targaryen, heartbroken by betrayal and fighting her own sense of destiny, had won, but at a cost that left her precariously perched upon the throne of melted swords. It was after that cataclysmic battle, when Daenerys reigned uneasily from the Red Keep, that Varys considered his secret anew. The new queen was a Targaryen, and if anyone could communicate with or command hidden dragons, it should be she. Yet he hesitated. There were rumors about the madness that lurked in the Targaryen bloodline, and there was the memory of the devastation already wrought by a single full-grown dragon. The ones beneath the city were younger, smaller than Drogon but more numerous. Only a handful existed, but that handful could be the difference between destruction and salvation. He had to decide if the risk of revealing them outweighed the threat of losing all stability in Westeros. In the end, no one forced his hand. The impetus came from whispers that spread through the city. Shadows seen in the night, strange noises echoing from below, the disappearance of 1 or 2 homeless children who often wandered the labyrinth of cellars under the Red Keep, searching for scraps of food. Varys' little birds brought him the stories in quavering voices, unsettled by what they had heard, or believed they had heard. The rumors became unstoppable, a trickle that threatened to become a flood, until Varys realized that if he did nothing, someone else would stumble upon the dragons and reveal them with far less caution than he would. And so he prepared. He stood in a small, windowless chamber deep in the Red Keep, not far from the dungeons. His robes were black and unadorned, and his hands shook as he lit a single candle. The flame danced in the still air, revealing the lines of tension on his face. He whispered to himself, though he rarely spoke to no one. He reminded himself of the Targaryen words, fire and blood. Then he remembered the spidery tunnels that connected the deepest layers of the Red Keep to older structures beneath the city. He remembered the silent presence he had once felt in those caverns, how the hair on his arms had stood up as if touched by static. Whether that was his imagination or the raw aura of living dragons, he still did not know. All he knew was that he had left quickly, heart pounding. He summoned a handful of his most trusted little birds, loyal, older spies who owed him their lives in one way or another. Some had grown up in his service, and he knew them well enough to trust them with a fraction of the truth. He told them they would be searching for something dangerous and that they must remain silent about all that they saw. If any word of this leaked to the wrong ears, it could spark a civil war worse than anything Westeros had yet seen. He gave them no illusions. If the dragons were discovered, everyone would want them. Even the queen might fear their presence. And if the queen feared them, well, fear too easily turned to death in the world they inhabited. One by one, they slipped into the secret tunnels that began in a hidden storeroom behind the scullery. Only Varys held the entire map in his mind, for he had memorized the path from countless forays beneath the castle. The air grew cold as they descended, and the stone walls glistened with moisture. The deeper they went, the older the architecture became, changing from the lines of Targaryen stonework to the remnants of earlier civilizations. Cracks ran like veins through the mortar, and sometimes the walls seemed on the verge of collapse. The darkness was nearly absolute, broken only by the guttering torches carried by Varys and his companions. Drips of water echoed, and occasionally, a scuttling rat darted across their feet. One of the spies nearly shouted when he felt fur brush his ankle, but Varys silenced him with a stern gesture. They needed to remain quiet, though it was unclear if that quiet served to protect them from watchful guards or from whatever might be lurking below. At length, they came to a wide passage with an arched ceiling. The masonry was different here. Massive blocks of black stone that seemed far older than the Red Keep itself. Varys suspected that some of these tunnels predated the Targaryen conquest, perhaps going back to the days when men in Westeros practiced darker arts. That sense of antiquity weighed heavily upon them as they walked. They found themselves in a sprawling cavern. The floor dropped away into darkness, and a narrow ledge extended along the side of the wall. Far below, water lapped at stone as if from an underground lake or river. Varys was not entirely certain what lay beneath, only that it fed into deeper places still. A rancid stench hit them, pungent with the smell of rot and waste. One of Varys's companions retched quietly. The others tried to cover their noses and press on. At the far end of this ledge, another tunnel opened, narrower and rougher, more natural cave than man-made corridor. The air was hot there. This was the place he remembered. Without speaking, Varys stepped onto the ledge. He moved more slowly now, testing each foothold before shifting his weight, for a single misstep could send him plunging into black waters. The others followed, hearts hammering, trusting in his guidance. It took them the better part of an hour to reach the opening of the tunnel. By then, the heat had intensified enough that their skin gleamed with sweat. The moment they set foot inside that dark passage, they heard faint rustling, almost imperceptible. It was like the sound of a breeze through dry leaves. Yet there was no breeze here. No wind could reach them so far beneath the surface. Varys raised a cautionary hand, and they all froze. The torchlight flickered, casting moving shadows on the walls. Then, in a shallow alcove up ahead, they saw it. A flicker of movement, a small shape scuttling on four limbs. For an instant, the shape vanished behind a rock, and one of Varys's spies nearly cried out in alarm. Varys himself felt a surge of anxiety. He had not expected them to be so close to the entrance, so near to the city above. But the dragons had grown bolder, it seemed, or perhaps their territory had expanded as they grew. They pressed forward. The rustling grew louder, more numerous. There was a clicking sound, the scrape of claws on stone, and an echoing hiss that raised the hairs on the back of every neck. At that, all 5 of Varys's companions drew back a step, muttering silent prayers. But they trusted the spider, and so they did not flee. They entered a wide chamber lit strangely by patches of what seemed like phosphorescent moss. The faint glow provided just enough illumination to see outlines of stony pillars and lumps of rock. Amid these shapes, they glimpsed the sinuous forms of small dragons, no larger than dogs, creeping in the darkness. Their scales glinted black, tinged with red or green or gold in the torchlight. Some perched on ledges. Others moved in slow circles around a nest of rubble. Their eyes glowed a fierce yellow, reflecting the light back in an unsettling manner. Varys felt his heart pounding so hard it was a wonder the dragons could not hear it. By his count, there were at least 5 distinct shapes. Perhaps more were hidden beyond the gloom. He had suspected at most 3 or 4. This was more than he had anticipated. Careful not to make any sudden moves, he motioned for the others to stay behind him. Slowly, he lowered his torch, not wanting to startle or threaten the creatures. The largest of them rose up on its hind legs, spreading small but formidable wings. Its head turned toward the intruders, and a low hiss escaped its throat, the scales around its neck flaring slightly. The creature was black as jet, with a single ridge of scarlet horns crowning its skull. Its eyes narrowed. It had grown since Varys last saw it. When he had first come here years ago, that same dragon had been small enough to cradle in his arms if he dared to pick it up. Now it seemed the size of a large hound, its claws scraping the ground with a lethal promise. No one moved. The air hung taut as a bowstring. Then the dragon lowered its body, sniffed the air, and let out another hiss that reverberated in the cavern. The smaller dragons seemed to take this as a signal. They, too, hissed or scampered, some ascending the walls to perch in higher niches. One breathed a small jet of flame, just a foot-long burst that fizzled in the moist air. It was a display, a warning. Varys inhaled slowly, forced a calm he did not entirely feel, and then he did something that surprised even him. He spoke softly in High Valyrian, reciting a lullaby he had once heard sung by a Targaryen retainer. His accent was imperfect, but he hoped the language itself might contain some vestige of power over these beasts. The largest dragon tilted its head, as though listening. The hiss subsided a fraction. Varys continued, his voice a steady whisper, weaving the ancient words through the stale air of the cavern. Behind him, one of his companions lost her footing, sending a small rock clattering across the stone. Every dragon jerked its head toward the sound, and the tension skyrocketed. Varys's chant wavered. For an instant, he thought the creatures would attack. But the dragons did not spring forward. Instead, they remained where they were, watchful but uncertain, their reptilian eyes shining in the dim glow. Varys had enough presence of mind to realize a delicate standoff was in effect. He slowly reached into a pouch at his side and withdrew a piece of dried meat, smuggled from the kitchens for this exact purpose. He tossed it onto the stone between himself and the largest dragon. It landed with a slight smack. The big dragon sniffed the air, took 2 cautious steps forward, then snatched the morsel with uncanny swiftness, retreating a few steps to devour it. The sound of crunching echoed through the chamber, the creature evidently relishing the offering. Satisfied that they were not in immediate danger, Varys signaled his spies to remain calm. He offered more meat, inching closer, feeling sweat bead on his brow from both the heat and his mounting anxiety. The largest dragon continued to accept the offerings, though it kept its gaze locked on him the entire time. The smaller dragons prowled about, seemingly content to let their leader engage the newcomers. In that moment, Varys realized they were not mindless beasts. There was caution and intelligence in their eyes. These creatures had survived in secret under the city for years, possibly longer, feeding on rats, stray dogs, or anything else that wandered too far below. They had avoided detection or at least capture all this time. If they had wanted to attack, they would have done so the moment they saw the torches. That they hesitated spoke volumes. Minutes passed in a slow dance of trust. Eventually, the largest dragon allowed Varys to step close enough to lay another piece of meat on a rock no more than an arm's length away. The creature's nostrils flared as it took in Varys's scent. A rumble came from deep in its throat, a curious, resonant sound. Varys wondered if this was how dragons communicated more intricately than men realized, in low frequencies and subtle signals. He dared not push his luck too far on this first real attempt at contact. After the final piece of meat was devoured, he quietly backed away, bowing his head as he did. The dragons watched, but made no move to follow. At the entrance to the chamber, he paused, looked over his shoulder. For a moment, his eyes and the black dragon's eyes locked, two cunning intelligences appraising each other. Then Varys turned and led his group back into the cavern, torches flickering as they made their slow retreat. Once they were far enough away, he allowed himself a breath of relief. His companions spoke in hushed, urgent voices, their words trembling with excitement, fear, and wonder. "What in the seven hells was that?" whispered one. "A dream? A nightmare?" Another asked, "Does the queen know?" Varys silenced them with a raised hand. "No one knows," he said, "and I mean to keep it that way for now." They returned to the Red Keep by the same route, forging their way back across the ledge and through the winding tunnels. The entire time, Varys's thoughts spun. He knew that the discovery of living dragons beneath King's Landing could ignite every ambition, every fear, in the realm. The potential for chaos was immeasurable. Yet the memory of the black dragon's eyes stayed with him, kindling something that might have been hope or dread. Weeks passed. Varys continued his routine, attending the Queen's small council meetings, listening to the petitions of lords and emissaries, gleaning secrets from every corner. But each night, he found himself drawn to the hidden passages again. Sometimes he went alone, though it was risky. Other times, he brought one or two of his trusted spies. Slowly, carefully, they worked to gain the dragon's tolerance. They brought fresh meat, discovered that the beasts preferred raw flesh still warm from the kill. More than once, a hapless piglet or small goat vanished down a hungry maw. In these clandestine visits, Varys gleaned more details. There were indeed 5 dragons of various sizes, likely from the same clutch. The largest, the black one, was clearly dominant, though one with emerald scales seemed equally fierce. Another had shimmering golden accents, its eyes luminous in the darkness. The smallest 2 were paler, grayish-white with faint patterns of gold. They stayed close to the walls, more timid than their siblings. None were large enough to be ridden by a man or woman, at least not yet, though that day might come if they continued to grow. Varys wrestled with whether to inform the queen. Daenerys Targaryen was the mother of dragons, the breaker of chains, and she had suffered great losses. One of her 3 original dragons was dead. Another was wounded. Drogon alone remained fully formidable, but he carried scars from the battles. The existence of 5 younger dragons could tip the balance of power irreversibly in her favor. With them, she could hold the Iron Throne unchallenged. Then again, the cost to the realm might be too great if she fell back into the anger that had tainted her before. He weighed the personalities around the queen. Tyrion Lannister, her hand, was wise and cautious, a man who might see reason. Grey Worm was loyal but had little patience for intrigue. Sansa Stark in the north was still uneasy about southern rulers, particularly Targaryens. Jon Snow, or Aegon Targaryen, as some insisted, remained torn between duty and honor, never quite sure if the throne was truly his birthright or a burden to be shunned. And there were countless other lords and ladies with their own agendas, from Dorne, the Reach, the Stormlands, the Vale. Any of them could try to claim or destroy the dragons if they learned the truth. At last, the problem came to a head when more rumors surfaced that something monstrous lurked below. The city had been uneasy ever since the war, and small folk were prone to whispering about ghosts and ghouls in times of trouble. But now the rumors had teeth. There were stories of a butcher who vanished near the Red Keep's underground storerooms, of a guard dog that came back limping and covered in strange burns. One day, Varys overheard 2 gold cloaks talking in hushed tones about unusual scorch marks found in a deserted wine cellar. It was becoming impossible to hide. If one of these minor incidents provoked a serious search of the dungeons, the secret would be out. So, on a night when the moon was high and the wind carried a breath of the sea through the dark corridors, Varys slipped into the queen's private chambers. He was practiced at this, and Daenerys's guards were used to him moving about at odd hours. He found her alone, gazing out a narrow window at the faint lights of King's Landing. She turned, and her expression was guarded. "Lord Varys," she said, "it's late. Are you here with tidings from the city?" Varys inclined his head. "Your Grace, I come with more than tidings. I come with a secret that I can no longer keep to myself." She regarded him with a mixture of curiosity and mild suspicion. "You keep many secrets, Spider. Why is this one so urgent?" He took a moment before replying, carefully choosing his words. "Because it concerns dragons." A strange look passed over her face. Part hope, art sorrow, perhaps recalling the children she had lost. "You come to speak of Drogon?" "No, Your Grace." He paused, letting the silence draw taut. "I come to speak of other dragons. Hidden dragons, beneath the city." She blinked, and for the first time in a long while, Varys saw genuine shock on Daenerys's face. Then suspicion took over. "Are you jesting with me?" He shook his head. "I swear upon my life and upon the realm I serve. There are dragons beneath the Red Keep. 5 of them by my count." Her eyes narrowed. She demanded more details, cross-examining him with the sharp intelligence of one who had seen too many betrayals. Patiently, he told her everything. How he had discovered traces of them years ago, how he had verified their existence more recently, how they had been growing in secret, feeding on whatever they could find. He spoke of the black one with the scarlet horns, the emerald-scaled sibling, the smaller pair with ghostly colorings, and the golden-accented one that moved like liquid flame in the darkness. He recounted his attempts at contact, the offerings of meat, the cautious acceptance. Daenerys listened without interrupting, though her expression fluctuated between awe and horror. When he finished, she turned away, pacing. "If this is true, we must see it for ourselves." Varys nodded. "I feared you would say that, Your Grace. It is risky, but so is keeping it a secret any longer." She turned back to him, eyes alight with something akin to fervor. "They are Targaryen dragons, are they not? Who else would they respond to if not me?" He did not voice his private fears that these creatures might not be so easily swayed by lineage alone. Instead, he offered a quiet, "As you say, Your Grace." The next night, under the cover of darkness, Daenerys donned a simple cloak and accompanied Varys through the same hidden passage behind the scullery. She brought only one guard, Grey Worm, who insisted upon it. Tyrion was left in the dark, for now. The risk of telling too many was too great. Daenerys moved with the practiced poise of someone who had traveled dangerous paths before, though the cramped tunnels and dripping ceilings unsettled her. Grey Worm followed close behind, scanning every shadow. When they reached the ledge overlooking the underground lake, the queen gasped at the vastness of the cavern. The torchlight danced on the water, revealing a subterranean world older than the city above. Step by step, they crossed the ledge until they found the narrower tunnel that led to the dragon's lair. The moment they entered, the temperature rose. Grey Worm stiffened, hand on his spear. Daenerys's breathing quickened, but she pressed forward. Varys, leading the way, felt the old prickle of unease. He whispered a caution. "Stay close, Your Grace. They sense everything." Then they arrived at the chamber. The phosphorescent glow revealed the 5 shapes stirring in the darkness, drawn by the torches and the presence of strangers. The black dragon, largest of the brood, stepped forward with its wings half raised, hissing. Daenerys inhaled sharply but did not draw back. Grey Worm placed himself between her and the dragon, but she laid a hand on his shoulder. She took a step forward. There was a tension so thick it felt like a physical presence. For a moment, the black dragon snarled, jets of smoke trailing from its nostrils. Then Daenerys spoke, a single word in Valyrian that Varys recognized as a gentle command. The dragon froze, tilting its head to one side. Daenerys repeated the word, softer. Her voice laced with the authority of an ancient bloodline. The black dragon's snarl subsided. It turned its great head sideways, as though regarding her curiously. Behind it, the other dragons rustled, uncertain. Daenerys inched closer, arms raised slowly to show she held no weapon. Grey Worm clenched his spear so tightly that his knuckles whitened, but he did not interfere. Varys watched with bated breath. At last, Daenerys stretched out a hand, much as she had done with Drogon when he was young. The black dragon sniffed her palm, its reptilian eyes narrowing. Then it exhaled softly, a burst of hot air that smelled of sulfur. Daenerys did not flinch. She let her hand come to rest on the dragon's snout. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then the black dragon let out a low croon, a sound both powerful and oddly tender. A wave of awe swept the chamber. Varys exhaled the breath he did not realize he had been holding. Grey Worm lowered his spear, astonishment plain on his face. The other dragons seemed to relax, though they stayed back, eyeing the humans warily. For the first time, the hidden brood of King's Landing recognized another being as something more than prey or intruder. They recognized Daenerys Targaryen, blood of the dragon. In the days that followed, Daenerys visited the hidden lair repeatedly, accompanied by Varys and a small retinue of unsullied guards who were sworn to secrecy. She began to feed the dragons herself, forging a tenuous bond. She spoke to them in Valyrian, sang soft lullabies reminiscent of the ones she had crooned to her first 3 dragons. Slowly, the brood grew accustomed to her presence, if not entirely tame. Yet the question remained, what now? Daenerys contemplated the possibility of raising these dragons openly, letting the world see that the Targaryen dynasty was stronger than ever. But she hesitated, recalling the devastation unleashed by Dragonfire. One slip, one moment of rage or fear, could result in thousands of deaths. Drogon alone had terrified armies. 5 more dragons, even if smaller, multiplied that power. Then there was the matter of how others would react. Lords might rebel rather than submit to a queen who hoarded a secret brood beneath their very streets. Varys counseled caution, as did Tyrion when he was finally brought into the fold. If you march 5 dragons into the sunlight, Tyrion said one evening, you risk provoking every kingdom to rise against you. They will see you as the tyrant they feared you were. And if you keep them hidden, you risk discovery that could be even worse. Rumors and half-truths can be more dangerous than the truth. Daenerys turned to him, eyes troubled. Should I destroy them then? Rid the world of them before they become a threat? Tyrion sighed. You're the queen. It's your decision. But let me ask, are you prepared for the cost? Morally, spiritually, these creatures might be the future of your house. And if you destroy them, you might tear out a piece of your own soul. But if you keep them and use them as weapons, you risk the realm's fear and hatred. You speak as though there is no middle path, Daenerys said softly. It's not that there isn't one, Tyrion replied. It's just very narrow and treacherous. She glanced at Varys. What does the spider think? Varys bowed his head slightly. I believe the realm needs a strong queen, but a queen must not let fear or ambition guide her blindly. If these dragons can be guided, nurtured, and introduced to the world slowly, then perhaps they can be a symbol of unity rather than horror. Yet, if we fail in that, if we lose control even once, he let the implication hang in the air. Grey Worm's stance was more straightforward. They are powerful, he said. If we do not claim them, our enemies will try. The tension in the Queen's Council was palpable. They had a weapon that could guarantee dominion over Westeros or destroy it. Daenerys decided that for the time being, the dragons would remain hidden, but she would train them in secret, ensuring they grew accustomed to her commands and presence. In time, perhaps, she would reveal them carefully, under circumstances that would not tear the realm apart. That was the plan anyway. Plans have a way of unraveling when confronted with ambition, fear, and unforeseen events. The first sign of trouble came when a minor functionary in the Red Keep, a scribe's assistant named Garen, stumbled upon one of the concealed passages. Whether by curiosity or by following suspicious footprints, he found himself in a restricted area. He overheard the rhythmic breathing of something large and bestial in the darkness. Panicking, he fled and babbled to a fellow scribe about a monster in the deep. That scribe had connections to a minor lord who had once been loyal to Cersei. Before long, a rumor spread that the Targaryen queen kept foul beasts chained in the dungeons, preparing them to burn any who defied her. All of a sudden, the city's undercurrents churned with renewed gossip. Varys's little birds brought him troubling reports from the flea-bottom taverns, where men spoke of the mad dragon queen, conjuring new horrors. The memory of King's Landing in flames was still fresh. Some openly questioned the wisdom of supporting Daenerys, especially since the city had yet to recover fully from the last war. A shadow of revolt flickered in corners where desperation and discontent met. Meanwhile, across Blackwater Bay, remnants of Euron Greyjoy's scattered fleet had allied with unscrupulous merchants. They whispered about placing someone else on the throne, someone who would protect their trade interests. They were not the only ones with an eye on the Iron Throne. Old grudges do not fade easily in Westeros. The revelation of hidden dragons only stoked these resentments and fears. Daenerys tried to quell the rumors by day, reassuring her people that she sought only peace and prosperity. She made efforts to rebuild, to feed the hungry, to stabilize trade routes. But by night, she continued to visit the young dragons in their lair, forging a deeper bond. In a matter of months, the creatures seemed to grow at an accelerated rate, as if the hidden flames beneath the city nourished them. Some Targaryens of old had claimed that dragons grew according to the space they had and the freedom to fly, but these were living proof that they found a way to flourish even in the dark. The Black One, whom Daenerys tentatively called Umbraxes, had grown large enough that he could barely fit through certain corridors, forcing Varys to think of ways to enlarge some passages without arousing suspicion. The Emerald Dragon, which Daenerys called Varatheon, was leaner but nearly as long. The golden-accented one, Orion, proved agile and quick. The two pale ones, Cinerys and Valera, were smaller and more timid, yet no less fierce if provoked. They were siblings, after all, and their eyes burned with the same draconic fire. It was on a particularly hot summer night that the fates conspired to break the delicate secrecy. The city reeled under a sweltering heat wave, and tempers flared as quickly as sweat beaded on every forehead. Deep below, in the dragon's lair, something startled Orion, perhaps a sudden rush of air or a rodent scurrying underfoot. The golden-accented dragon let out a roar that reverberated through the tunnels. The sound, magnified by the subterranean echo, traveled through cracks and passageways that led near the dungeons, near storerooms where soldiers patrolled. A small group of gold cloaks heard it distinctly, a monstrous roar from somewhere in the depths. Panicked and uncertain of its origin, the gold cloaks followed the sound, stumbling upon a half-hidden corridor. Their torches revealed scratch marks on the stone, undeniable signs of something large. They advanced cautiously, one of them cursing the day he was born to become a city watchman. Then, abruptly, they came face to face with Cinerys, who was skulking near an offshoot tunnel. The dragonlet hissed, wings flaring. The guards screamed, some dropping their torches. Cinerys roared. Flames spewed forth, scorching two men where they stood. The others fled. Word spread like wildfire through the Red Keep. A dragon was loose below, a new monster that no one had told them about. Frenzy gripped the guard, conflicting orders rang out, and alarm bells were sounded in the courtyard. Daenerys, hearing the commotion, rushed to intervene, but the damage was done. The presence of multiple dragons could no longer remain a secret. Chaos seized the corridors as the Gold Cloaks organized a search, with some segments of the Watch determined to kill the beast, others simply desperate to confirm the rumors. The clang of steel on stone echoed from the depths. Varys and Tyrion exchanged grim looks as they hurried after the queen. Grey Worm mobilized a detachment of Unsullied to protect the dragons from panicked soldiers. In the confusion, Umbraxes sensed danger to his smaller sibling. The black dragon thundered through the tunnels, smashing through stone that had not been built to withstand such force. He collided with a group of gold cloaks. They tried to fight, spears and swords glancing off his scales, but Umbraxes unleashed fire that turned the passageway into an inferno. The screams of burning men mingled with the roar of the flames. A thick column of smoke rose, seeping into the castle above. Daenerys arrived at the edge of the carnage, her heart pounding. She raised her hands, calling out to Umbraxes in Valyrian. The dragon recognized her voice and hesitated, halting the onslaught. But the damage was done. Several gold cloaks lay dead or dying, the walls scorched black. The rest of the dragons arrived behind Umbraxes, drawn by the commotion. The flickering torchlight revealed their forms in a tableau of raw power. A silence descended, broken only by the crackle of remaining flames and the whimpers of wounded men. Then, from the corridor behind the queen, a cluster of frightened courtiers and scribes peered in. When they saw 5 dragons, eyes shining in the gloom, they let out collective gasps. Daenerys stood at the forefront, flanked by Grey Worm and the Unsullied. There could be no denying the truth now. She was the mother not of 3 dragons, but of an entire brood. Shock reverberated through King's Landing. Terrified rumors claimed the queen had bred an army of dragons to finish what her father had started, to burn the city and rule over ashes. Others insisted the beasts were abominations, that the city must rise and destroy them before they grew to unstoppable size. But some, especially those still loyal to House Targaryen, saw this as a sign that Daenerys was the rightful ruler, chosen by fate to restore dragons to the realm. Riots erupted in sections of the city. A crowd gathered outside the Red Keep, demanding answers. Some held makeshift weapons, stoking the flames of rebellion. Others prayed to the Seven, convinced the end times were upon them. The small council met in urgent session. Tyrion insisted that the queen address her people directly to calm the situation. Grey Worm counseled readiness to crush any rebellion. Varys warned that if the city perceived Daenerys as a tyrant with unstoppable weapons, it would break into open revolt. Reluctantly, Daenerys decided to address the crowds from a balcony overlooking the outer courtyard. The 5 dragons were hidden back in their lair, but she knew she could not hide them forever. "You must show strength without cruelty," Tyrion advised. "Show them that you are still their queen, not a tyrant." So she stepped onto the balcony, flanked by unsullied guards, and looked down upon a sea of anxious faces. Smoke lingered in the hot air from the underground fires. Murmurs ran through the crowd like a current. Daenerys raised her arms, calling for silence. It took several tries, but at last, the chattering ceased enough for her voice to be heard. "People of King's Landing," she began, her voice reverberating across the courtyard. "You have heard rumors that more dragons dwell beneath this castle. Those rumors are true." A swell of murmuring rose, but she pressed on. "I did not create them, nor did I seek to hide them for ill intent. They are the last offspring of a line that once brought greatness to Westeros, and sorrow, I know. But they are living creatures, not devils incarnate. They stand under my protection, as do you. I do not wish to burn or terrorize my own city. I ask only for your trust, and in return, I pledge to protect and serve you, as I have sworn to do since I took the throne." At first, her words were met with a mix of jeers, shouts, and scattered cheers. Many were unconvinced. They had seen dragons incinerate men not long ago. Some demanded she destroy them. Others demanded she keep them caged. A few shouted out praises of House Targaryen. The tension was nearly tangible. Then Tyrion stepped forward, leaning over the balcony. He spoke with the wry, cutting logic that had served him so well in the past. "Does anyone truly want another war? Another rebellion that will see your streets run red? She is your queen, but she is not your enemy. If these dragons were meant to be used against you, you would already be ash. They are not as large as Drogon, but they are dragon enough to burn King's Landing 100 times over if that was her wish. Yet you stand here alive and shouting. Take that as proof of her intentions." This did little to soothe everyone, but it was a start. In the following days, Daenerys attempted to quell the panic. She ordered strict patrols around the Red Keep to ensure the dragons did not roam freely. She also made overtures to prominent guilds and merchants, explaining that she would use dragons to safeguard trade and shipping routes, not to levy more destruction. And she began discreet negotiations with major houses, promising that the existence of these dragons was not a prelude to tyranny but a chance to foster unity under a queen who would defend the realm. Some remained unconvinced. Others saw an opportunity. Ambitious lords began sending agents to the capital, hoping to bribe or sway individuals who might grant them access to the dragons or at least intelligence on how they might be exploited. One rumor claimed that Qyburn's former acolytes had discovered a method to poison dragons. Another rumor insisted that the Iron Bank had placed a bounty on any of the smaller dragons, intending to gain a bargaining chip against the crown. The city simmered with tension, as if one spark could ignite the powder keg. And that spark arrived in the form of a self-declared pretender to the throne, a young man claiming to be Aegon Targaryen, rumored to have survived the sack of King's Landing decades ago. This so-called Aegon, who had once tried to rally support in the Stormlands, re-emerged with a small but fervent following. They marched toward King's Landing, proclaiming that Daenerys was a usurper who had succumbed to the madness of her ancestry. They pointed to the city's partial destruction and the newly revealed brood of dragons as proof of her tyranny. They claimed that only a true Targaryen could peacefully unite the realm. Daenerys's advisors debated how to respond. Some, like Grey Worm, argued for a swift military strike before the Pretender's force could muster. Others, like Tyrion, cautioned that attacking first might validate Aegon's claims. Varys listened, his expression unreadable. He remembered how the realm had nearly torn itself apart with claimants and counterclaimants, each seeking to brand the other as impostors. He knew that even a rumor could topple a throne if the realm's faith wavered enough. Ultimately, Daenerys decided she would ride out to meet this Aegon in parley. She did not trust him, but she needed to show restraint. Burning a potential rival without negotiation would only reinforce the suspicion that she had become another Mad Queen. She took Drogon, still the largest dragon, leaving the younger brood behind in King's Landing under guard. But not all of them stayed put. Umbraxes, the black dragon, had developed an attachment to Daenerys, following her in the tunnels and occasionally letting her ride on his back in a confined space, though flight was impossible underground. Perhaps that bond was enough for him to want to join her. As Daenerys and her retinue passed through the city gates, Drogon's shadow blanketing the roads, a distant roar rose from the depths behind them. Before the Unsullied could stop him, Umbraxes tore through newly widened tunnels and emerged onto the lower levels of the Red Keep. People scattered in terror. The black dragon took flight clumsily, smashing a portion of the castle's outer wall as he launched himself into the sky for the first time. It was a majestic yet terrifying sight. A juvenile dragon, his wings still smaller than Drogon's, but fully capable of flight. The watchers on the walls cried out, their hearts lurching at the spectacle. Umbraxes soared in an uneven path, following the queen, as if driven by some instinct to protect the mother he recognized. Below, the city trembled. Another dragon had taken to the skies. Fear spread like a plague among the small folk, igniting the old terror that the Targaryens would reduce them to cinders. Some barricaded their homes. Others fled to the countryside. The remaining 4 young dragons, now missing their alpha, prowled restlessly in their subterranean domain, their roars echoing through the cracked stone. The parley with Aegon took place by a broad river bend outside the city. Daenerys landed Drogon on one bank, while Umbraxes circled overhead. Aegon and his small retinue stood on the other side, watching with a mixture of awe and determination. The young man had the silver-blonde hair of Valyrian descent, but Daenerys noticed subtle details that made her doubt his authenticity. She had heard the rumors that Varys himself might have once backed a boy claiming to be Rhaegar's son, but Varys had not spoken of it in years, and Daenerys never fully learned the truth. She hailed the pretender, demanding to know the nature of his claim. He proclaimed himself the rightful heir, speaking of how he had been smuggled away before the mountain could kill him. He apologized for the necessity of standing against her, claiming he did so to save Westeros from further dragonfire. Daenerys's lips curved into a grim line. "The realm needs saving from itself, not from me. I did what I had to do to claim what was mine. And I do not fear you, false or not." Aegon stiffened. "Then it is war?" She hesitated, recalling Tyrion's advice. "Do not appear the aggressor. I did not come here to burn you. Bend the knee, if you are loyal to House Targaryen, and I will grant you pardon and a place in my court." She paused, surveying the small band of men behind him. "Defy me, and you will face the consequences of your choice. But I will spare your men if they lay down their arms." A murmur ran through the Pretender's followers. Some seemed uncertain. Then Aegon drew himself up, pride warring with reason. "We stand for a Westeros free of fear," he shouted, raising his sword. That moment, Umbraxes swooped low, letting out a roar that shook the trees. Aegon's horse bucked, nearly throwing him. Half his men stumbled back, terror etched on their faces. The confrontation teetered on a knife's edge. Daenerys, sensing that violence might be inevitable, prepared to command Drogon. She could see the fear in the eyes of the opposing force, men who had never faced a dragon in battle. But then, from the corner of her eye, Daenerys saw a flash of movement in the sky. Orion, the golden-accented dragon, had escaped the subterranean lair and flown out of the city as well. How it had found its way above ground, she could only guess. Perhaps it had followed Umbraxes' path through the damaged walls. Now it soared overhead, keening for its alpha or its mother. The presence of yet another dragon rattled the Pretender's men further. Some broke ranks and ran, scattering into the nearby woods. Aegon stood alone, sword trembling in his hand, forced to confront the monstrous reality of 2 dragons overhead and a third on the ground. Daenerys shouted to him, "Yield, and I'll spare you." But pride or fear consumed him. He let out a cry of desperation and charged forward. His horse galloped across the shallow river, hooves splashing water in all directions. Drogon bellowed, steam rising as his nostrils flared. Daenerys had no choice. She commanded Drogon to roar a warning. The black dragon Umbraxes answered from the sky, unleashing a stream of flame that scorched the riverbank. The horse reared, and Aegon was thrown to the ground, sword flying from his hand. Wounded and drenched, the Pretender struggled to stand. Daenerys urged Drogon forward, looming over him. "Surrender," she said again, voice carrying across the water. The young man looked up, eyes filled with a mix of hate and terror. He opened his mouth, perhaps to spit defiance. Then, in a sudden surge of motion, Umbraxes landed with a resounding crash just behind him. The shockwave knocked Aegon off his feet. The black dragon roared, a sound that echoed in the heavens. That was the final blow to the man's courage. He dropped to his knees, hands trembling. "I yield," he rasped, tears mixing with mud and river water on his face. He seemed to realize in that moment how futile it all was, how unstoppable a Targaryen queen with multiple dragons could be. Daenerys inclined her head, though her eyes remained hard. "Take him," she commanded her guard. "He shall be brought back to the city for trial." Her men rushed forward, seizing the Pretender. His few remaining followers were scattered or in hiding. The brief confrontation had ended without major bloodshed this time. But the message was clear. Daenerys had more dragons, and no would-be usurper could stand against her. When they returned to King's Landing, the sight of 3 dragons overhead sent shockwaves through the populace. Even those who supported Daenerys felt a shiver. The memory of the city's near destruction was too fresh. Yet the display of power also silenced many who had been swayed by the Pretender's propaganda. With their chosen champion defeated, they hesitated to oppose a queen who had living weapons of fire and scale. The realm stood at a crossroads. Fear of the dragons could either unite the people under Daenerys' rule, or drive them into desperate rebellion. She recognized the precarious line she walked. In the weeks that followed, she strove to show mercy, to maintain justice, and to avoid the fiery destruction that could so easily become her hallmark. She summoned the lords of Westeros to King's Landing for a grand council. offering them the opportunity to swear fealty and discuss a path forward that might incorporate the dragons as protectors, rather than tyrants. Some accepted out of genuine loyalty or pragmatic fear. Others bristled, but realized they had little choice. A few refused to come, fueling rumors of a hidden alliance forming in the Westerlands or the Vale, perhaps seeking to craft scorpion bolts or other dragon-killing weapons. Varys, ever watchful, sent his spies to unearth these plots. Tyrion steered the political negotiations with acumen, offering incentives to the lords who complied. Tax reductions, trade privileges, positions of influence in the Queen's court. Meanwhile, the brood continued to grow. Umbrax's first taste of open sky emboldened him. He became bolder, patrolling the skies around King's Landing. Orien often followed. Baratheon, the Emerald One, began to test flight as well, though the labyrinth below was still their home. Rhaenys and Valera, the two pale dragons, remained smaller and more cautious, though they too showed signs of wanting to leave the subterranean confines. Each time they emerged, the city quaked with dread, but Daenerys was there to calm them, to guide them away from the rooftops and spires. She commanded them to hunt in the countryside for game, leaving the city's people unharmed. Mostly. There were still incidents. Missing livestock, the occasional burned field. Fear was a stubborn weed, impossible to eradicate fully. To keep control, Daenerys formed a special wing of the Unsullied and Dothraki who trained with her and the dragons, learning commands in Valyrian, forming a bond of mutual respect. It was an unprecedented endeavor, taming not just a single dragon but a brood of them, and it was not without danger. One Dothraki warrior attempted to show dominance by shouting at Baratheon, earning a scorched arm for his trouble. Another lost his life when Valera panicked during a feeding. Each incident chipped away at the precarious balance of trust. Amid all this, the question lingered. Had Varys done right by unleashing these hidden dragons? For better or worse, the realm was forever changed by their existence. King's Landing, once overshadowed by memories of wildfire, was now overshadowed by the presence of living fire incarnate. Daenerys stood as a queen of unparalleled power, yet also unparalleled peril. If she stumbled, if her control slipped, if she or the dragons succumbed to rage, the city could burn anew. Varys felt the weight of that possibility every day. He watched Daenerys carefully, noting her composure in council, the flicker in her eyes when angered, the set of her jaw when lords tried to defy her. He remembered how quickly things had escalated the day of the parley. He remembered how close they had come to a slaughter, and he knew that eventually, all men's hearts could fail, especially under relentless pressure. Even queens were not immune. Yet for a time, Daenerys rose to the challenge. She mended the fractures in her court, rebuilt trust as best she could, and sought a way for dragons and men to coexist without descending into tyranny or chaos. Umbraxes, Orien, Baratheon, Rhaenys, and Valera became both symbols of House Targaryen's might and wild beasts that demanded constant vigilance. The hidden lair beneath King's Landing became a carefully guarded annex, expanded and fortified to accommodate the growing dragons when they chose to return. Craftsmen labored to strengthen the tunnel walls, to create subterranean stables of sorts, though calling them stables for dragons felt woefully inadequate. Still, fear lingered in the populace. Subtle rumbles of dissent could be heard in taverns late at night, out of earshot of the gold cloaks. Some whispered that the queen was fated to lose her mind, just as her father had, and that the dragons would be the ruin of them all. Others believed the dragons were a miracle, proof that the old glory of Westeros could be restored. No one could say which vision of the future would win out. In the heart of that uncertainty, Varys tried to console himself with the knowledge that, for now, the realm was more stable than it had been in years. Daenerys' rule was largely uncontested. The Pretender had bent the knee, and foreign threats had diminished. Trade began to flourish, and the scars of war slowly healed, all under the watchful shadows of dragons perched upon the Red Keep at dusk. Yet stability is a fragile thing in Westeros. The seeds of the next crisis were already in the wind. A resurgence of Ironborn raids along the western coast, whispers of a plague in Old Town, the inevitable scrabbling for power among minor lords in the Riverlands. And always, there was the question of who would one day rule these dragons. Dragons outlive their masters, people said. What happens when Daenerys grows old? Or if she falls to a blade or betrayal? Who will command the brood then? Could they be truly tamed? Or was this only a temporary alliance, with the instincts of beasts simmering beneath the surface? For the moment, though, Varys allowed himself a rare moment of reflection, standing on a high balcony overlooking the city at twilight. He watched as Umbraxes soared across the darkening sky, wings beating powerfully, shimmering with the last rays of the dying sun. No, he thought, I do not regret freeing them. The realm has long needed something greater than the petty ambitions of men. Perhaps dragons, formidable and majestic, might force the powerful to think beyond themselves, or burn them if they refused to learn. He only prayed the realm could survive their presence, because once dragons are unleashed, they cannot be caged without consequence. The future of King's Landing, of Westeros, rested on that razor's edge. 5 young dragons, a city still haunted by fire and blood, and a queen determined not to repeat the mistakes of the past. Varys could feel the realm trembling beneath his slippered feet, as if echoing the rumble of dragons stirring below. Whether it was a tremor of hope or doom, no one could yet say, but it was done. The dragons were loosed upon the world once more, and the spider, ever watchful, ever whispering, remained uncertain whether he had delivered the realm from darkness or merely cast it into a deeper shadow. The only certainty was that the time of dragons had returned, and with it, the greatest test the 7 kingdoms had ever faced. The young dragon Valera crooned in the half-dark of the cavern, her pale scales glimmering in the torchlight as she hovered protectively over a pile of half-gnawed bones. The flicker of the flames danced across her ridged neck, revealing the faint pattern of gold that traced her spine. Nearby, Orion lay curled atop a cluster of old stone rubble, his own golden markings reflecting the fire's glow with an almost metallic sheen. The cavern walls were dark with soot where Umbraxes had scorched them in his attempt to free himself days earlier. A fine layer of ash blanketed the uneven floor. Varys stood at the edge of the chamber, robed in muted colors that vanished easily into the shadows. His eyes flicked back and forth, taking in every detail of the dragon's movements, the subtle ripple of muscles under scales, the tension in their postures. These creatures were no longer secrets to the realm but living realities that shaped every conversation within the Red Keep. The whispered horror in the taverns beyond the castle walls had only grown since the day Umbraxes broke free, a monstrous black shape tearing a hole in the Red Keep's outer wall. Varys could still picture the terrified faces of the small folk as they watched another dragon rise into the skies over King's Landing. It felt like a second sacking, not of men but of hearts, overshadowed by the wings of beasts. The realm knew now. The entire city knew that Queen Daenerys Targaryen harbored 5 new dragons beneath their very feet, broodmates that had survived who knew how long in the darkness. Even if Varys sometimes questioned the wisdom of revealing them, it was too late for secrecy. The truth slithered across the 7 kingdoms with all the unstoppable momentum of a tidal wave. Envoys and spies from every corner of Westeros arrived daily, each hoping to glean a scrap of new information or form alliances that might protect their interests should Daenerys unleash her new brood in war. And though the queen had no current intention of flinging her power across the land, fear and rumor proved far more potent than any official pronouncement. Varys's slippered feet made scarcely a sound as he crossed the chamber, approaching the shallow crater in the floor where Daenerys rested. She hissed softly at his presence. He offered her a chunk of goat meat from a basket one of his little birds had carried down. The pale dragon sniffed the morsel, her forked tongue flicking out with surprising delicacy. She accepted, chewing with audible crunches that made Varys suppress a shudder. Then she lowered her snout, allowing Varys to set a second piece of meat at her clawed feet. Daenerys had always been the more timid of the brood, second only to her sibling Valera. But timid did not mean harmless. If threatened, she and her sister displayed lethal ferocity. Varys remembered how shocked he had been on his first day of sustained contact, seeing Valera defend Daenerys over something as trivial as a dead rat. The smaller two might not rival Drogon in size, nor Umbraxes in aggression, yet they were dragons all the same, and all dragons were dangerous. A quiet rasp of scales alerted him that someone had entered the cavern. He turned to see Grey Worm appear in the archway, flanked by two Unsullied who bore torches. They wore the same stony composure as always, though their eyes darted warily at the dragons. Grey Worm raised a hand, and the Unsullied halted. He came forward alone. "The Queen has summoned the council," said Grey Worm in his soft but unyielding voice. "A rider arrived from the north. Urgent news." Varys dipped his head in acknowledgement, murmured something reassuring toward Cineris in Valyrian, words he had studied in order to soothe the brood before turning away. He wended his way back up the labyrinth of tunnels, mindful of the wet stone beneath his feet, listening to the faint echoes of dragon breath. Once, these passages had been lonely warrens where only rats and the occasional lost beggar ventured. Now they housed living flame, a boiling crucible of potential chaos. When Varys emerged at last into the dimly lit corridor behind the Red Keep scullery, he could smell bread baking. The heat of the ovens mingled with the heat radiating from beneath the floors, creating a near-stifling atmosphere that beaded sweat on every brow. Servants gave him sidelong glances. Some trembled at any mention of dragons, as though speaking the word aloud might draw the creatures into their nightmares. Others eyed him with resentment, suspecting he had known of this threat for years and concealed it from them, a suspicion that was, of course, correct. He passed into the main keep and made his way toward the council chamber, where Tyrion Lannister, newly minted Hand of the Queen, was already waiting with a grave expression. The chamber was a solemn place these days. It bore scars from the wars, blackened stone from the fires that had raged during the assault on King's Landing, chipped columns, and a replaced section of the floor that clashed in color with the older marble. Daenerys sat at the head of the massive wooden table, wearing a simple yet regal gown of dark fabric. Her silver-white hair was woven into a braid, revealing the set of her jaw. Tension lined her face, though her eyes brightened slightly at Varys's approach. Seated beside her was the captive Aegon, the pretender who had tried to lay claim to the throne. He was not so much seated of his own will as placed there under guard, manacles still encasing his wrists. Two Unsullied stood behind him, poised to restrain him if he tried anything. Tyrion insisted on letting the pretender observe certain council sessions, perhaps in the hope of discouraging further plots or gleaning some measure of insight from the man's reactions. Whether it was an act of clever manipulation or simple mercy remained unclear. Nonetheless, the so-called Aegon had thus far done little except stare sullenly at the table and attempt to hide any flicker of fear. Grey Worm took up position near the queen. Varys inclined his head to Daenerys, then glanced around. Ser Davos Seaworth sat on her other side, half busy studying a small roll of parchment. Once the loyal advisor to Stannis Baratheon, Davos had lately become a voice of reason, a man well-versed in the cost of war. Beside him was Brienne of Tarth, who had come south at the Queen's invitation to serve as a link to Sansa Stark and the North. The rest of the council was composed of minor lords and functionaries. Many of the great houses still hesitated to openly support or reject Daenerys's reign. Tyrion cleared his throat. "We've been awaiting your arrival, Lord Varys." He tapped the scroll in front of him. "A message from Lady Sansa Stark in Winterfell. It seems she's grown concerned about rumors that the Queen is expanding her arsenal." Daenerys's voice held the weariness of repeated explanations. "She refers to the additional dragons." Tyrion nodded. "Indeed, the letter is polite enough, but the undertone is clear. The North wants reassurance that these new dragons will not be unleashed upon them or anywhere else. I believe Sansa's exact words were, 'We endured one wave of fire. The North will not endure another.'" Daenerys clasped her hands together, regal fingers woven tightly. "I do not intend to terrorize the North." Then softer, "I understand their fear. We have not spoken face to face since the war ended." Ser Davos exhaled. "Fear is not always rational, Your Grace. It persists regardless of your intentions. People see dragons in the sky and remember the smell of charred flesh. Even if you never mean to burn another city, they cannot be certain. Not yet. Daenerys's gaze flicked over to Aegon, who looked back at her with guarded eyes. He had not spoken a word since they entered, a silent prisoner forced to witness her authority. Then she turned her attention to the entire table. I will not disclaim my dragons, nor will I apologize for their existence. They are living creatures that I have sworn to protect, just as I swore to protect the people of this realm. But I will extend a gesture of goodwill. Tyrion, you will draft a reply to Lady Sansa, inviting her to send delegates or come in person if she wishes. I will make it clear that the dragons are not a threat to those who keep the peace. Brienne of Tarth inclined her head. I can personally vouch for the sincerity of the Queen's invitation. Though Lady Sansa may not trust easily, she does not desire another war. Tyrion scratched notes on a piece of parchment. Very well, a carefully worded letter it is. I'll compose it before sundown. What of the Vale? Or the Westerlands? Varys asked quietly. We have heard rumblings of discontent from certain lords who used to support Cersei. Lord Brax, in particular, has been vocal about refusing the Queen's rule if she threatens them with dragons at every turn. Tyrion made a wry face. Lord Brax is as stubborn as a donkey in the mud, but even he can be moved by gold or by the prospect of losing trade routes if he continues his defiance. He might grumble, but he won't raise open rebellion yet. If he does, well, he gestured meaningfully, though the mention of unleashing dragons never left his lips. He didn't need to say the words to make the point. Daenerys leaned back in her seat, as though the entire weight of the continent pressed on her shoulders. We need a show of stability, a signal that the crown is not perched on the edge of another conflict. Rebuilding the city has been slow, but progress is visible. Some in the countryside have begun to return to their farms. We must not shatter that fragile peace. Grey Worm spoke from his place near her. My queen, the men who remain fearful will not be convinced by letters. They will believe only what they see. If they see dragons in the sky, they cower. If they see them trained or bound, they question your power. There is no easy path. I know, Daenerys said quietly. She glanced at the captive Aegon. And you, do you have anything to say on these matters? Perhaps you'd like to counsel me on how best to govern your prospective subjects. The young man's cheeks flushed. He lifted his chin, trying for dignity despite the manacles. My counsel would be that you free the realm from the terror of dragons, but I expect you've no intention of that. No, she said firmly. I do not. I have known dragons my whole life. They are not devils, but I also acknowledge the possibility of destruction if they are misused. His expression twisted. Spare me your lectures. Your father was known as the Mad King, and you, Grey Worm moved so quickly that Aegon didn't have a chance to finish. With a jerk, he backhanded the prisoner's mouth. Not hard enough to break a jaw, but enough to snap his head to the side. The clang of manacles resounded, and the room stilled. Tyrion's eyebrows rose. Even he hadn't expected that level of sudden violence from Grey Worm in a council setting. Daenerys's lips parted, but she did not chastise her commander. Aegon glared, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. See what you are? Daenerys's voice was brittle. I see a man who raises old ghosts to justify rebellion, and I see a commander who will not tolerate your insolence. But I have no desire to see you beaten into silence. You will remain as you are until I decide your fate. If you want to avoid further pain, hold your tongue or speak with respect. Without waiting for a reply, she turned her gaze away from him and directed her attention to Tyrion. Draft the letter to Lady Sansa and send similar invitations to the Vale and the Westerlands, urging them to send envoys. Promise them that if they come in peace, they will find peace in my court. Tyrion gave a short nod. As you wish, your grace. And now, Daenerys said, rising from her seat, I must attend to the dragons. Umbraxes and Orien have taken to flying beyond the city walls at times. We cannot risk them being injured or provoked by fearful farmers or wandering soldiers. I'll speak with them if dragons can be spoken to. She swept out of the chamber, Grey Worm and a handful of Unsullied trailing after. Varys followed, though more slowly, exchanging a tense glance with Tyrion. The hand of the queen looked grim. Both men understood the precarious nature of the situation. Daenerys was trying to balance the absolute power of dragons with a desire to avoid tyranny. Tensions within the city and beyond remained high. If a spark ignited, if the younger dragons injured or killed too many innocents, a full-scale rebellion might erupt. And if Daenerys felt cornered, she might resort to the kind of devastation they had all witnessed once before. The realm walked a razor's edge. Outside, the courtyard was bustling. Supplies were piled for reconstruction efforts. Timber, stone, barrels of nails. A group of soldiers from the City Watch were drilling with pikes, their sergeant barking orders to keep them in line. Overhead, the sky was hazy with summer heat, the sun beating down mercilessly. King's Landing still had not fully recovered from the destruction that accompanied Daenerys' conquest, and the sweltering months made labor all the more grueling. Varys made his way to the western ramparts, from where he could see a wide swath of the city below. Shanties had risen among the ruins. Impoverished families clung to whatever scraps of shelter they could find. Farther up the winding streets, the more affluent districts showed signs of rebuilding with new plaster and paint. The bells of the Great September, rebuilt in a humbler form after the original's destruction, tolled faintly in the distance, marking the passing of the midday hour. Groups of small folk bustled in the market squares, buying and selling what little produced the farmland around the city could supply. The tension in the air was almost palpable, yet life went on. A shape passed over the rooftops. Varys looked up. Umbrax's soared overhead, his black wings cutting a stark silhouette against the bright sky. The sun gleamed off his ridged horns, and he released a roar that echoed across the city. A ripple of fear coursed through the streets below. People craned their necks or scurried for cover. Some had grown accustomed to Drogon's presence over the past years. But Umbrax's was a new terror, a sign that the city itself harbored more beasts. The black dragon circled once, then flew toward the Red Keep's upper battlements, scattering a flock of startled pigeons. Varys watched, pensive. Soon, Orion appeared in the sky as well, his golden markings shining like hammered metal in the sunlight. He was smaller than Umbrax's but more agile, gliding with lethal grace. The two dragons circled each other, then made a slow descent toward the yards behind the castle. Varys turned away and headed in that direction. He arrived at the training yard just as Daenerys strode into it. Unsullied guards promptly cleared the area, ushering out the city watchmen who had been practicing. Within moments, the yard was quiet except for the scraping of the wind and the beat of dragon wings. Umbrax's settled with a thud, dust billowing around his talons. Orion hovered a moment longer, then landed more gently, folding his golden-tinted wings. Their arrival kicked up grit that stung Varys' eyes. He watched from a short distance as Daenerys approached Umbrax's with careful deliberation. The black dragon hissed a greeting, lowering his head so she could place a hand on the ridge above his snout. She murmured something in Valyrian that Varys couldn't make out. Over the weeks, Umbrax's had shown signs of intense loyalty to Daenerys, if a dragon's loyalty could ever be trusted. Orion sidled closer, curious or possessive, and Daenerys patted his snout in turn. Seeing their size and strength up close was startling. Even so young, their physical presence could cow entire armies. Each breath of Umbrax's brought a rumbling undertone, as though he carried thunder in his chest. Grey Worm observed from near the yard's entrance, spear in hand. A few Unsullied stood behind him, unsure if they were meant to guard the dragons from the queen or the queen from the dragons. Varys had never envied their position. If these beasts chose to incinerate everyone present, no amount of spears or discipline would save them. Daenerys turned toward the Watchers. They grow restless. They want to range farther, to hunt beyond the outskirts of the city. She moved a strand of hair away from her face, her features stern with resolve. We need to ensure they don't provoke another panic. Last time Umbrax's flew off, half the city thought I was about to repeat the sack of King's Landing. Grey Worm gave a curt nod. We can set a perimeter outside the walls. Inform the farmers to keep their animals penned when the dragons are in flight. The Unsullied will try to keep travelers out of their path. It's a temporary measure, Daenerys said. Once they grow larger, no perimeter will hold them. They'll fly wherever they please. I need them to understand boundaries. She sighed, stepping back as Umbraxes lashed his tail, restless. If I chain them, it risks their wrath. We saw what happened with Regal and Viserion when I tried to lock them away for a time. Drogon never forgave the chains. Not fully. Varys inclined his head. Dragons do not thrive in captivity, Your Grace. But if they remain free, the realm may fear you as a conqueror again. She gave him a sideways look. I would rather be feared than see my dragons harmed. But I do not wish to be hated, nor do I desire more bloodshed. The realm must see that I govern with justice. A royal of feeling underlay her words. Varys wondered if she was recalling the moment she'd almost succumbed to her worst impulses. The day King's Landing had been battered by Dragonfire. She had stepped back from total destruction, but not soon enough to prevent casualties. The scars of that day would never truly fade, either from the city or from Daenerys herself. Just then, a loud screech sounded overhead. Baratheon, the Emerald Dragon, swooped into view. He circled once, graceful but impatient, and came to land beside Orion. Like siblings reunited, the two hissed and jostled for position. Daenerys stroked Baratheon's flank, uttering a soft command for calm. Varys took the opportunity to slip away. There were pressing matters beyond the immediate concern of wrangling dragons. He had heard from his little birds that fragments of Euron Greyjoy's old alliance might be stirring on the coast. They had shipping connections, sellswords, and perhaps an interest in toppling a queen whose greatest advantage was flight. He also knew that Qyburn's leftover experiments, the Scorpion Ballistae, still existed in hidden caches. If certain lords discovered or replicated those weapons, the younger dragons might be threatened, and that threat could spur Daenerys into a violent reaction. He needed to gather intelligence, to ensure that no unholy alliances formed in the darkness. As he walked the corridors, he encountered Tyrion in hushed conversation with two scribes. Tyrion gestured for them to leave, then turned to Varys. Have you heard the latest? Another rumor about a plot to slip poison into the dragon's food. Utter nonsense, I suspect, but it shows the length to which fear drives men. Where did the rumor originate? Varys asked, though he was fairly certain no one would claim ownership of such talk. A cask of untested dragonbane in the black markets of Lys, apparently. You know how these myths rise. Someone claims to have an elixir that can slay dragons with a single drop, sells it for a fortune, and disappears after the first buyer tests it on a stray cat. Tyrion's mouth twisted in grim amusement. Still, the unscrupulous lords might chase any rumor that offers them hope of controlling or killing the brood. Varys's voice was subdued, which only increases the queen's wariness. If she believes the realm conspires to murder her children, she will lash out. Another spiral of violence we cannot afford. Tyrion sighed, rubbing his temples. Yes, well, that's the real risk. Dragons are unstoppable, but we're not. We can only counsel and guide as best we can. He paused, his mismatched eyes flickering with a hint of exasperation. In truth, I worry about the day the younger dragons reach their full strength. They might never match Drogon's size, but 5 dragons, even moderately grown, would pose a threat far beyond what any scorpions or cunning alchemist could handle. And how does that day differ from the present? Varys asked, arching a brow. Tyrion gave a short laugh, devoid of true humor. It's just a matter of scale, my friend, no pun intended. The city trembles at the mention of hidden dragons. Imagine how they'll tremble when those dragons each have wingspans wide enough to darken half the sky. Varys's gaze wandered down the corridor, as though searching for watchers. He lowered his voice. That day might come sooner than we think. Dragons grow quickly, especially when well-fed and free to fly. They feed on goats, sheep, sometimes deer from the Crownlands. If rumors are true, They may have devoured the occasional bandit. Each meal, each week that passes, they expand in size and confidence. Tyrion nodded, then patted the leather-bound scroll he carried. I'll write the letters to the lords now. Hopefully we can keep them placated. But I fear the lull in conflict may not last. The smallest spark, a damaged farmhouse, a missing child, an overzealous gold cloak, could set off a frenzy. Varys agreed silently. The entire realm was a tinderbox waiting for the slightest ember. That evening, Daenerys gathered the brood in the courtyard once more, though this time the young dragons arrived in a more orderly fashion. Rhaenys and Valera, coaxed up from the cavern, hovered at the edges, uncertain of the open air. It took the combined efforts of Daenerys and a handful of her bravest Dothraki riders to lure them out. The pale dragons snarled at the presence of so many humans, but a fresh wagon of butchered goats finally overcame their reluctance. By the time the courtyard gates were secured, all 5 dragons huddled around Daenerys, devouring a small feast. The sun dipped below the walls of the keep, and torchlight flickered across scaled hides. A ring of Unsullied stood at a respectful distance, spears at the ready. Tyrion and Varys watched from a balcony above. Once they had seen Daenerys do this with Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion. But the sense of scale was larger now, the risk multiplied. Still, Daenerys moved among the dragons with surprising serenity. Umbraxes lowered his great black head so she could scratch beneath his jaw. Orion let out a rumble that sounded almost like a purr as she ran her fingers along the golden ridges over his eyes. Baratheon flicked his tail but tolerated her nearness. The smaller two hissed quietly, though they, too, seemed to be growing accustomed to her presence. "This is what they must see," Tyrion said quietly, gesturing to the scene below. Not a woman commanding beasts of war, but a queen nurturing creatures under her protection. If the realm glimpsed this, they might fear her less. Varys clasped his hands. "You propose a demonstration? A parade, perhaps, leading dragons through the streets? That would likely cause more panic than reassurance." Tyrion shook his head, exhaling. "No, not a parade. Something more formal, more controlled. A demonstration of training, as if they were falcons or hounds. But I wonder if that can even be done with dragons." "It can't be done in any conventional sense," Varys replied, "and any attempt might backfire if the brood decides they do not want to be displayed." Below, Daenerys lifted her voice in Valyrian. A few words floated up, commands to hold, to hush, to stay. It appeared to Varys's eye that only Umbraxes truly obeyed. The black dragon reared slightly, arching his wings, then folded them again, as if acknowledging the request. The others, especially the smaller pair, responded more slowly. Still, each time Daenerys repeated a word, the dragons paused in their feeding or turned their heads to her. It was not absolute submission, but it was more than mindless independence. Night deepened, and the torches in the courtyard flared bright orange against the darkness. Daenerys dismissed the Dothraki riders, who slipped away to stable their horses. The Unsullied maintained their stance, though more for ceremony than any real hope of controlling the dragons. Slowly, the feast ended. Bones littered the cobblestones, and the acrid smell of scorched flesh filled the air, reminding everyone present that dragons ate not only raw meat, but often cooked their meals with small bursts of flame. When Daenerys approached the iron-bound doors that led back into the castle, all 5 dragons snapped to attention in their own distinct ways. A flick of the tail, the ruffling of wings, or a parted jaw that revealed rows of dagger-like teeth. She beckoned them with a single word, "Ixio," come in High Valyrian. Umbraxes responded first, loping after her with a grace that belied his bulk, while Orion and Baratheon followed in a more sinuous manner. The Pale Sisters lingered, but ultimately they came too, trailing behind with low growls. She led them to the very opening in the castle walls that Umbraxes had once blasted apart in his eagerness to be near her. Masons had hastily repaired much of the damage, though the stonework still looked patchwork. She paused by the gap, gazing out into the night. Beyond the Red Keep's walls stretched the city, its thousand flickering lights testifying to the presence of countless souls who lived in fear or uneasy acceptance of the dragons. Farther still, faint glimmers reflected off the waters of Blackwater Bay. The wind rustled her hair, carrying the briny scent of the sea. Daenerys murmured to her brood, urging them not to roam too far, to return before dawn. She seemed to grant them leave to fly if they wished, but to do so carefully. The dragons made no immediate move to depart, as though confused by the partial command. Then Umbraxes spread his wings, gave Daenerys a lingering look, and leapt into the air with a powerful downstroke. Dust swirled in the courtyard. Orien hissed softly and followed, launching himself gracefully. Baratheon hesitated, scanning the horizon with alert eyes, then sprang after them. Daenerys and Valera let out a chorus of uncertain growls, hopped onto the partially rebuilt wall, and took wing. The brood soared over King's Landing, 5 dark shapes illuminated by the moon. Daenerys watched from the gap, her expression a mixture of pride and apprehension. Tyrion and Varys descended from the balcony and joined her, seeing the silhouettes vanish into the distance. "Will they come back?" Tyrion asked quietly. "Or might they wander so far they never return? They're bound to me in ways I don't fully understand," Daenerys replied. "I believe they'll return. They always do eventually. They know where to find me, and where to find food." Her tone was laced with guarded optimism. Varys looked out upon the sprawling city. "We can only hope they don't frighten half the population to death. If they swoop too low or spook livestock, we'll hear complaints by sunrise. The rumor mill never sleeps." Daenerys nodded. "Then I'll address those complaints. Better to meet them head-on than let them fester." She turned back into the castle, her figure lit by the torches, posture regal. "I need to speak with the Masons again, and with the harbor officials. We must ensure trade continues to flow if we're to rebuild from the war." So the night wore on, with the Queen tending to the mundane tasks of governance, even as her dragons roamed the skies. In the hours before dawn, Umbraxes and the others returned, silently alighting on the upper ramparts or the courtyard walls, unseen by most. Daenerys, sleepless, greeted them with a relief she did not entirely hide. She watched them settle, each finding a niche or cranny near the Red Keep's towers. Umbraxes curled around a tall spire, wings half-closing, while Orien perched precariously on a wide battlement. Baratheon, Daenerys, and Valera roost in the courtyard, resting in the open air rather than retreating to the subterranean depths. The next morning brought new difficulties. A messenger from Dorne arrived, carrying a sealed parchment from the Prince of Dorne, a newly appointed noble who had stepped into the Martell vacuum after the region's last tragedies. The message was polite but carried hints of suspicion, referencing the potential threat of multiple dragons once again roosting in the capital. Dorne had endured enough Targaryen invasions in the past to be wary of any sign that the crown might consider them rebellious. Still, the letter held an offer. If Daenerys truly sought peace, Dorne might be convinced to extend trade routes and alliances, so long as she refrained from menacing them with draconic might. The Queen read the parchment in silence. Tyrion, standing by her side, coughed gently. An alliance with Dorne would be advantageous. They have their own proud history of resisting dragons, though. Daenerys glanced at him. "They do. But times have changed, and I'm not my ancestors. I'll write back, inviting them to visit and see for themselves that I am not threatening them. If they do not come, I'll send an envoy." Tyrion nodded. "Wise. We'll keep the lines of communication open, but let's not be naive about their intentions. Dorne is pragmatic. If they suspect you might use the dragons against them, they'll gather allies to preempt that threat." She placed the parchment aside. "Then let them come and see with their own eyes that I desire no war. I have enough on my plate without more bloodshed." It was midday when a disturbance rippled through the Red Keep's corridors. Aegon, the Pretender, had vanished. His guards lay unconscious, presumably drugged or overpowered. By the time Grey Worm discovered the empty cell, the man was long gone. Furious, Grey Worm assembled search parties to comb every level of the castle. Rumors swirled that the captive might have escaped through an old smuggler's passage, or that a spy had helped him. Some said he had possessed a hidden blade or that he had conspired with the City Watch. No one had a clear explanation for how he could slip past the heightened security. Yet gone he was. Tyrion and Varys joined Grey Worm in the search, but to no avail. Daenerys strode through the halls in a controlled rage, demanding answers. The gold cloaks in charge of the dungeons swore they knew nothing. The Unsullied who had been assigned to guard him were found in a stupor, their tongues thick, their eyes glazed. A cunning poison or drug had been used. "If the Pretender is free," Daenerys said in a cold tone, "he will stir up more trouble. He may not have an army left, but a desperate man can do much harm." Tyrion exhaled. "We must recapture him. If he finds his way to supporters in the Westerlands or the Stormlands, he might claim we tried to kill him, fueling more uprisings." Grey Worm was silent, but the set of his jaw told everyone how personally he took the escape. He had struck the prisoner in the council chamber. He would not make the same mistake again if given another chance. All doors to the city were ordered watched, the gates sealed. Yet King's Landing was vast, with thousands of potential hiding places, and the Pretender might already be outside the walls. Over the next days, tension climbed. Everyone was on edge, unsure when or if Aegon might resurface. The City Watch patrolled the streets more aggressively, occasionally clashing with angry small folk who resented the increased authority. In Flea Bottom, drunkards whispered that the Targaryen queen had lost control of her fortress if a mere pretender could vanish so easily. Daenerys forced herself to remain calm, ignoring the jibes. Instead, she oversaw the final adjustments to the Red Keep's defenses, including a new watchtower near the repaired wall. She insisted on honesty from her advisors. If they discovered any evidence of a betrayal within her own ranks, they were to inform her at once. One humid afternoon, Varys's little birds returned with a rumor that Aegon had been seen near an old townhouse in the city's southwestern quarter, an area once reserved for lesser nobles. The building stood half-ruined, unoccupied since the war. Varys quietly dispatched a handful of loyal informants to investigate. They found no one but squatters. Another sighting placed Aegon near the Dragon Pit. Ironically enough, though no one saw him enter. Yet another rumor suggested he had slipped onto a ship bound for Pentos. Every lead turned murky, and Daenerys seethed. Amid this uncertainty, the brood continued to grow bolder. Umbraxes and Orions soared over the bay, terrifying dockworkers and fishermen who huddled under their sails at the sight of scaled shadows rippling over the water. Sometimes the dragons snatched a fish or two, or battered a gull in midair. The city learned to adapt, but fear thrummed like a taut string. Baratheon often soared with them, while Rhaenys and Valera stayed closer to the keep, rarely venturing beyond the gates. That left the city with a near-constant overhead presence of at least one or two dragons, day or night. For Daenerys, controlling them felt like wrestling the sea itself. She had bonds with these creatures, yes, but they were not docile beasts. On more than one occasion, Umbraxes returned to the keep with blood dripping from his jaws, some unknown kill clutched in his talons. A rumor surfaced that a farmer's child was missing near the King's Wood. Daenerys' stomach lurched at the possibility the brood had devoured a human, but there was no proof. She quietly offered a reward for any evidence of the child's whereabouts, hoping the rumor was nothing more than paranoia. Still, each rumor chipped away at her composure. As the tension built, Tyrion persuaded her to hold a public audience in the Red Keep's throne room, granting commoners the chance to air grievances or request boons. "Let them see you as a just queen," he advised, "not a distant tyrant. Show them you listen to their troubles and do not hide behind Dragonfire." She agreed, albeit reluctantly. The memory of how the people had once reviled her father lingered. She did not want to be perceived in the same cruel light. The following week, the throne room doors opened, and a line of petitioners shuffled in, their clothes threadbare, their faces drawn. Some bowed with trembling humility, others stared with resentment. Daenerys sat on the Iron Throne, still somewhat twisted from Drogon's flames, while Tyrion stood beside her, a record keeper at hand. Ser Davos lingered to one side, and a handful of Unsullied guarded the dais. The first petitions were minor: a dispute over a well, a complaint about taxes, a request for funds to rebuild a collapsed roof. Daenerys listened, responded with measured kindness, and doled out what help she could. She ordered the Master of Coin to reduce a grain levy in one district, assigned laborers to repair a battered footbridge in another. Whispers passed among the small folk that the Queen's generosity might be genuine, but they also wondered how many dragons soared overhead at that very moment, unseen but not forgotten. Then a man stepped forward in a ragged cloak, standing on wobbly legs. He had hair of muddy brown, with a thick growth of unkempt stubble. His eyes darted around the throne room, as if searching for something. He looked younger than his voice suggested when he spoke. "Your Grace, I beg you, let me speak." He knelt so low his forehead touched the stone floor. Daenerys exchanged a glance with Tyrion. "Speak," she said. "I am Trebor of the Hook District," he began. I work near the fishing docks. My daughter, she was snatched from the shallows while playing. The folks there, they said they saw a shadow overhead, wings black as midnight." He swallowed, tears welling in his eyes. "They say it was one of your dragons. They say she's gone." A hush fell over the room. Even the petitioners behind him shrank away, as though standing near him might bring the Queen's wrath. Daenerys's face became pale. She clenched the arms of the Iron Throne. Tyrion cleared his throat. "Are you certain it was a dragon? Many creatures lurk near the docks, and people vanish in the city for other reasons. Kidnappers, slavers, criminals." Trebor's voice cracked. "They saw wings. A black shape soared out over the water. Then my girl was gone. No body, no blood, just screams, and then silence." A wave of horror swept the hall. Daenerys leaned forward. "If such a terrible thing occurred, you have my deepest sympathy. I will investigate fully. But are you certain it was a dragon that took her? Have you any proof beyond rumor?" The man looked up, tears streaking his cheeks. "There's no proof. Only the word of those who saw a black shape in the sky. And who else has black wings but your Umbraxes? Even if it wasn't him, the city sees your dragons overhead every day. We fear them." He seemed to forget caution, raising his voice. "You speak of justice. Where is the justice for my daughter?" Daenerys forced herself to remain composed, though she felt a stab of grief and guilt. "I will have the city watch search the area. I will question my own guard, my advisors. If a dragon was seen, we will see if it matches the timeline. If it was not a dragon, we will find the true culprit." "That doesn't bring her back," Trebor murmured, his shoulders shaking. He bowed his head again, as though exhausted by despair. "I wanted answers, or an apology." Daenerys's breath caught. "If my dragon did this, you have my apologies, though I know it will not ease your pain. I will see you compensated so you may not want for food or shelter, and I will do whatever is in my power to prevent any such tragedy from happening again." "Blood for blood," the man whispered so quietly that only those nearest the dais heard him. Tyrion stiffened, tapping his quill against the ledger. "I understand your grief, Trebor, but if you speak of violence against the Queen or the Crown's property—" "No," Daenerys interjected softly, raising a hand. "No, he has lost his daughter. He speaks from a broken heart. Let him speak, and let him go without punishment." Trebor gave her a lingering stare of mingled sorrow and bitterness, then bowed once more. The gold cloaks led him away. The hush in the throne room was deafening. All eyes were on the Queen, gauging her reaction. Would she erupt in fury or show mercy? She had shown mercy, yet the fear remained. For the rest of the session, Daenerys's mind was only half on the petitions. She delegated many decisions to Tyrion, nodding absently as he read the details. At last, the line of supplicants diminished, and the throne room doors were closed. She stood up from the Iron Throne slowly, feeling the cool metal against her palms. Tyrion watched her, concern etched across his features. She spoke in a low voice, Am I losing the realm's trust again? Tyrion walked up, careful not to stand above her. Rumors of dragons devouring children are the surest way to sow terror. And if it is true, she winced. I must speak with Umbraxes. Now. As night fell, Daenerys ventured back to the courtyard where the brood often gathered. Varys accompanied her, along with Grey Worm and a handful of Unsullied carrying torches. The sky was veiled in thick clouds, blocking moonlight. A gloom settled over the castle. They found Umbraxes perched on a thick section of wall, head raised to the wind, wings rustling. He lowered his snout when Daenerys approached, but as she reached to stroke him, she hesitated, searching his eyes as though looking for some clue about the alleged attack. Of course, he had no words to offer. She spoke softly in Valyrian, asking him if he had gone near the dock area that day. The dragon cocked his head at the sounds of her voice, exhaling a gust of hot air. She repeated the question, trying different intonations. Umbraxes rumbled, but offered no definitive answer. Dragons could sense her tone, interpret her posture, perhaps recall certain commands, but they did not speak in ways comprehensible to humans. Varys stood back, arms folded. He saw Grey Worm's tension, the subtle shift in his stance that signaled readiness for violence if the queen was threatened. The Black Dragon, for his part, showed no overt signs of aggression beyond the inherent danger in every breath he took. Without warning, Umbraxes pushed off the wall and soared upward, flapping heavily. A swirl of air buffeted the onlookers. Daenerys took a step back, raising an arm against the gust. She watched as the black shape vanished into the night sky, heading out over the city. Grey Worm's face was grim. We cannot chain him, but we cannot let him keep frightening the people. Daenerys closed her eyes briefly. I know. Then she whispered, if one of my dragons truly killed that child, how can I prove to the realm that it was an accident, not my will? Or if it was some other evil? Slavers, kidnappers. How can I assure the people that I am not to blame? Varys offered the only solace he could. The city will believe what it wants. We must find evidence that either absolves Umbraxes or at least shows the truth. Until then, we focus on demonstrating your compassion and your fairness. Word of your generosity must outpace rumor. She sighed. That is easier said than done. The days that followed were fraught. City Watch patrols scoured the docks for any sign of the missing child or the fishermen who claimed to have seen the dragon. Rumors circled like carrion birds, each more grisly than the last. Some insisted they had seen bones on the shore. Others swore the child had been rescued by a kindly Septon. None of it was substantiated. Daenerys publicly offered a reward for verifiable information, but the leads went nowhere. The city's mood curdled with anxiety and blame. In an attempt to calm the situation, Daenerys invited a handful of influential guild leaders and merchants into the Red Keep. She guided them, under careful supervision, to the edge of the dragon caverns so they could see that the brood was contained, at least when they were underground. The experience left them trembling but also oddly awed. Some returned to their communities with renewed caution, explaining that the queen was not ignorant of the city's fears. Others used the memory of the dragons to intimidate their rivals, cautioning them not to anger the crown. The outcome was mixed at best. Meanwhile, the pretender Aegon remained at large. Every day, new rumors alleged that he was raising an army in the countryside or conspiring with exiled lords across the narrow sea. Varys' spies uncovered no concrete evidence of his location. Tyrion brooded over the possibility that Aegon might strike at the city during its time of greatest unrest, using the people's fear against the queen who had once held him captive. Daenerys, for her part, tried to focus on the daily tasks of ruling, but the weight of potential betrayal gnawed at her. Another letter arrived from Winterfell, responding to the queen's invitation. It was not from Sansa Stark, but from Bran Stark, Bran the Broken, king of the Six Kingdoms, in another turning of the wheel, at least in some stories. But in this timeline or version of events, Sansa had claimed the North for herself. The letter, however, bore Sansa's seal alongside a short note from Bran. It expressed cautious acceptance of Daenerys' words and stated that a delegation from the North would indeed come to King's Landing to observe the situation. It also politely requested that no dragons swoop upon them on the road. Tyrion read the letter to the queen and exhaled with something akin to relief. This is better than outright hostility. At least they're willing to come. Daenerys eyed the parchment. Yes, but if they arrive to find chaos and rumors of man-eating dragons, it may drive them into open condemnation. Then we'll show them the measures we've taken, Tyrion said with forced optimism. We'll show them the attempts to rebuild. Perhaps seeing the dragons up close will remove some of the mystique. Fear often grows from the unknown. Daenerys nodded, though her gaze drifted out the window toward the bay, as if seeking a glimpse of Umbraxes or Orien. Very well. When the northern party arrives, we'll greet them with courtesy. Days crept by, the city simmering in midsummer heat. The missing child was not found, and soon other gossip overshadowed the tragedy. The rumor that Dorne might send troops to defend itself from Targaryen aggression flitted through the streets. A traveling band of jugglers spread a satirical puppet show depicting the queen perched atop 5 dragons, cackling about lighting the city ablaze. Daenerys did not punish them, hoping to show tolerance, though the performance stung her pride. At last, the Northmen arrived at the city gates on a cool morning after a thunderstorm broke the heat wave. The party consisted of several knights sworn to House Stark, along with a handful of bannermen from the Manderleys and Glovers. At their head rode a tall, red-haired woman in practical attire, Sansa Stark, Lady of Winterfell. She had come herself, apparently determined to see the truth behind the rumors. With her was Bronn, formerly in King's Landing to serve as Master of Coin under different circumstances, but apparently now aligning with the North for reasons of convenience or friendship. The presence of Bronn was unexpected and caused Tyrion to raise an eyebrow when the group arrived in the courtyard. Sansa greeted Daenerys with polite formality, bowing just enough to be respectful. Daenerys, wearing a gray and silver gown, returned the courtesy. The tension between them was undeniable, given their shared history and the tenuous state of the realm. "Welcome to King's Landing," Daenerys said. "I trust your journey was safe?" Sansa's voice was smooth but distant. "We had no trouble on the roads, aside from a few rumors that your dragons might greet us from the skies." "I see that hasn't happened." Daenerys inclined her head. "They're otherwise occupied. There's no need to greet you with such a display. I'm not here to intimidate you, Lady Sansa. I wish to talk." Sansa's eyes flicked around the courtyard, noting the presence of unsullied guards, Tyrion, Varys, and Grey Worm. "We'll talk, then." They retreated to a private solar where Daenerys laid out her vision of a realm at peace, describing her efforts to rebuild the city, feed the hungry, and ensure that the dragons did not harm innocents. Sansa listened with a composed expression, occasionally trading glances with her bannermen. She asked pointed questions about the alleged incidents of missing persons attributed to the dragons, about the city's readiness for winter, and about the continuing presence of a pretender at large. Daenerys answered honestly when she could, sidestepping where she must. Tyrion tried to moderate, using his knowledge of Sansa's temperament to maintain civility. He suggested that the presence of the North's delegation was an ideal chance to quell rumors by witnessing the brood firsthand. Sansa hesitated, then agreed to see them, on condition that the meeting place be secure. Late that afternoon, Daenerys guided Sansa and her selected companions to the outer courtyard behind the Red Keep, the same area where she often fed the dragons. An entire contingent of unsullied and Stark guards ringed the perimeter. Umbraxes, Orien, and Baratheon lounged near the battered wall, dozing in the sun. Rhaenys and Valera were absent, presumably in the subterranean lair. At the sight of 3 living dragons, the Northmen stiffened. One warrior let out a shaky expletive, while another made a warding sign. Sansa's face remained calm, though her eyes widened slightly. She stepped forward, flanked by Daenerys, and examined the beasts. Umbraxes lifted his head, gazing at the newcomers. A deep rumble reverberated in his chest. "They don't breathe fire at every stranger." "Then," Sansa observed quietly. "Not unless they feel threatened or commanded," Daenerys replied. "These 3 are accustomed to my presence." She cast a glance at Sansa, voice firm but earnest. "They are not mindless monsters, Lady Sansa. They respond to my words, my tone, to an extent. They remain dangerous, but they can be guided." Sansa eyed the black dragon warily. Guided, yes. Controlled, not fully. She paused, letting the tension hang. "I see the city has taken damage from their flights. The repairs on that wall seem recent." Daenerys nodded. "One of them broke free in a moment of excitement. The repairs are ongoing, as is the effort to keep them from harming the city further." Umbraxes rose onto all fours and stretched, unfolding his wings wide. The men around him tensed. Sansa took a measured step back. Daenerys, however, held her ground, murmuring softly in Valyrian. The black dragon froze, then lowered his head. It was a small sign of obedience, but it spoke volumes about the bond between Daenerys and her dragons. After a few heartbeats, the tension ebbed. Sansa turned to Daenerys. "I appreciate your willingness to show me this. We've heard so many rumors, some impossible, some merely frightening. Seeing them in person is instructive, but my concerns remain. If they grow larger, if your hold on them slips, or if you die suddenly—" She paused, swallowing. "What then?" "That is my concern as well," Daenerys admitted softly, surprising Tyrion with her candor. "I do not have an easy answer. I only know that condemning them to death or imprisonment is not an option I can bear. They are the last of a legacy that might bring hope as well as fear." "Hope for who?" Sansa asked, her tone cooler. "The small folk who worry about being devoured? The lords who fear their holdfasts might burn? Or hope for House Targaryen to maintain power by terror?" Daenerys's temper flared slightly, but she reined it in. "Hope for a realm where the presence of dragons discourages foolish wars. Where no one dares to try what Euron Greyjoy once did, burning the coasts indiscriminately because they know dragons patrol the skies. Where we need not build 1,000 ships of war to keep invaders at bay. That is one vision, at least." Sansa studied her. "And yet, if those dragons are turned against us by another madness, or by your heirs, assuming you leave any, where does that leave us?" Silence hung between them, heavy with implied threats and unspoken tragedies. Daenerys broke it at last. "You have a right to be wary, but trust that I do not desire another conquest. I have seen enough death." Sansa sighed and glanced at the dragons again. "Very well. I will inform my lords that you are at least making efforts to keep these creatures in check. I cannot promise more than that." "That is all I can ask," Daenerys replied. They retreated from the courtyard, leaving the dragons to lounge in the waning sunlight. An air of forced politeness pervaded the rest of Sansa's visit. She dined with Daenerys in the Great Hall, speaking mostly of northern concerns, grain stores, trade routes, the best ways to fortify holdfasts for winter. Tyrion and Varys offered advice, half hoping to cultivate genuine cooperation. Brienne of Tarth, who had come south earlier, joined them briefly, greeting her former liege lady with an unspoken warmth. But the conversation never strayed far from the uneasy presence of dragons overhead. On the second day, Sansa was preparing to depart when chaos erupted once more. A massive swirl of wings and roars near the city gates. Umbraxes had spotted a caravan approaching King's Landing from the west, its banners hidden by dust. Uncertain if they were friend or foe, the black dragon dove in. Panicked screams rang out as the caravan guards readied crossbows. Daenerys and Tyrion, alerted by frantic shouts, rushed to the walls to see Umbraxes circling overhead, flame flickering at his jaws. Shouting for calm, Daenerys urged the guards on the walls not to loose arrows. She scrambled to find a vantage point. Sansa followed, her expression turning to alarm. Grey Worm assembled a group of Unsullied to race to the gates. Tyrion cursed under his breath, recalling how a single spark could ignite a broader conflict. As Daenerys reached a parapet overlooking the gates, she saw that the caravan bore the sigils of House Brax, a minor house in the Westerlands that had been vocal in its distrust of the Queen. The caravan evidently came to treat with her, but they had not announced themselves in time. Now they were faced with a snarling dragon overhead. The crossbow bolts they fired whistled through the air, missing Umbrax's by a wide margin. Furious, the dragon unleashed a gout of flame that scorched the ground, igniting a hay cart. Men scattered, shouting. Daenerys gripped the crenellations. Umbrax's, Reba's, calm! She cried in Valyrian, her voice carrying, but the dragon, provoked by the crossbows, dove again. Another bolt sprang from below. This time it grazed Umbrax's flank, causing him to roar in pain. Sansa pressed her lips together, horrified. They'll kill each other if this continues. We must intervene, Daenerys said through clenched teeth. She whirled to the nearest unsullied messenger. Bring me a horse. Now. Before Tyrion could protest, Daenerys raced down the steps of the wall to the courtyard. Sansa followed, along with Grey Worm. They found a horse saddled for the queen in record time. Daenerys mounted, ignoring Tyrion's pleas to stay behind the safety of the walls. If Umbrax's is wounded and enraged, only I can calm him, she declared. Then she spurred the horse toward the open gates. The Unsullied poured out behind her, a disciplined line of spears. In the field just beyond the city's edge, the caravan had scattered. One wagon burned fiercely, sending plumes of black smoke skyward. Umbrax's circled overhead, occasionally swooping low. Daenerys saw a line of gold cloaks rushing out from another gate, trying to form a perimeter. If the House Brax men kept firing crossbows, Umbrax's would strike again and more thoroughly. The black dragon's flank bled from a shallow wound, fueling his fury. Daenerys rode forward, raising her voice in Valyrian. Lakiri, yield, or calm down. The horse beneath her snorted, terrified of the monstrous shape overhead. Still, she pressed on. Umbrax's swooped low, eyes blazing, but slowed when he recognized her silhouette. He let out a tremendous roar, half of pain, half of warning. She repeated the command, her tone firmer, and he hovered just above the ground, wings beating dust into the air. A savage glare flickered in his reptilian eyes. Daenerys dismounted slowly, risking everything. Behind her, Grey Worm ordered the Unsullied to hold their ground, spears level. House Brax's surviving men, seeing the queen approach, began lowering their crossbows in confusion. One of them, presumably the leader, shouted, "We came to treat with the queen, not to be roasted alive. You fired on my dragon first," Daenerys retorted, still focusing on Umbrax's. "Stand down." Umbrax's landed with a jarring impact. Smoke curled from his nostrils as he lowered his head toward Daenerys, chest heaving. She placed a hand on his snout, ignoring the heat radiating from his scales. Soft Valyrian phrases escaped her lips, urging calm, urging trust. Slowly, the dragon's rage seemed to wane, replaced by pain from the crossbow graze. Her eyes darted to the wound on his flank. The bolt had torn a swath of scales, leaving a bloody furrow. No doubt it burned. She cursed under her breath, wishing she had brought a maester or at least some bandages. Umbrax's let out a rumbling growl, part complaint, part acceptance of her presence. Meanwhile, Grey Worm and the Unsullied advanced, forming a barrier between the caravan and the dragon. The House Brax leader, a middle-aged knight named Ser Jorgen Brax, removed his helmet, sweat dripping down his face. "My lady," he said, confused, "we didn't realize it was your dragon. We saw a black beast swooping at us." Daenerys's eyes flashed with anger. "You chose to shoot first. Next time, lower your weapons and announce yourself properly." She gestured for Tyrion and Varys, who had arrived, panting on horseback, to approach. "See if the caravan has wounded who need tending." Tyrion signaled a few gold cloaks to check the wreckage. The men coughed through the smoke, hauling out one injured guard. Another lay motionless, likely dead from the flames. Ser Jorgen Brax, regaining a bit of composure, huffed, "We came to treat with you, to discuss House Brax's concerns, but it seems your demon lizard disagreed." Daenerys's patience was wearing thin. "You are lucky to be alive. Let us go inside the city walls. My maesters can treat the injured." We will talk when cooler heads prevail. Ser Jorgen eyed Umbraxes warily, then nodded. The caravanners dragged their unburned wagon and a handful of frightened horses toward the gates, while the Unsullied kept their spears ready. Sansa stood near the city's edge with her own guard, watching the entire spectacle with dismay. She caught Daenerys's eye and shook her head slightly, as if to say, "This is what you face every day." Back within the Red Keep, the tension did not subside easily. Umbraxes was led to the courtyard, where Daenerys did her best to clean and bandage the wound. The black dragon hissed and snapped at anyone who got too close. She alone managed to apply a salve the maesters provided, though the creature fidgeted and occasionally let out a low rumble of pain. The entire time, Sansa observed from a distance, arms folded, mind churning with what she had witnessed. Across the keep, Ser Jorgen and his men were treated for burns, offered water and rest. Tyrion spoke with them at length, trying to soothe tempers, to glean what they truly wanted. It became apparent that Lord Brax desired to see if the Queen's dragon plague was indeed as terrifying as rumor claimed and whether House Brax might gain certain concessions in exchange for loyalty. The burnt wagon contained expensive gifts, fine cloth, silver goblets, apparently a bribe of sorts to curry favor or possibly to test the Queen's openness to negotiation. When Daenerys finally met with Ser Jorgen in the audience chamber that evening, the man was still pale from the day's events. He bowed stiffly, ignoring the bandage on his arm. "Your Grace," he began, "I regret the unfortunate incident outside the walls." Daenerys's tone was icy. "As do I. You nearly provoked a war before we even spoke." He cleared his throat. "House Brax had concerns about your rule, concerns we hoped to address in person. We've heard you command 5 new dragons in addition to Drogon. Some in the Westerlands fear you plan to expand your domain by fire." She studied him, then exhaled. "I am not launching a conquest on the Westerlands or anywhere else. My dragons exist, yes, but I do not intend to use them arbitrarily. If I wanted war, I would have rained fire the moment you shot Umbraxes. You stand here alive, do you not?" Ser Jorgen swallowed. "We do. We appreciate your restraint." He hesitated, then added carefully, "Our lord and many others would pledge loyalty, provided you ensure these dragons do not ravage our lands." Daenerys nodded. "I will do what I can to keep them in check, but they are living creatures. They fly where they will. If your men do not provoke them, the risk remains low." Ser Jorgen forced a thin smile. "Then we shall not provoke them." Tyrion ushered the negotiations along, discussing trade rights, shipments of grain and ore, the potential for forging stronger ties between House Brax and the Crown. The man left looking relieved, if still a bit shaken. As soon as he was gone, Daenerys sank into her seat, exhaustion evident. Sansa approached from a corner where she had observed quietly. "You see how precarious it is? One misunderstanding, one frightened arrow, and blood is spilled." Daenerys nodded heavily. "I see it. Believe me, I live with it every day." Sansa's voice softened, though she remained guarded. "My lady, I do not envy your burden, but I will return to the north and tell them what I've seen, that you are not the mad conqueror some fear, that you strive to maintain peace. It's the best I can do." "Thank you," Daenerys said sincerely. "It means much." They parted civilly. Sansa departed King's Landing the next morning with her retinue, leaving behind a faint hope of improved relations between the Crown and the North, if only because Sansa had witnessed how chaotic and fraught the Queen's situation already was. Tyrion believed that perhaps the North would not stoke rebellion. Varys remained more cautious. "She will wait and watch. If we fail, she will not come to our rescue." And so the realm continued, balanced on the edge of a knife. The brood of hidden dragons was hidden no longer. They roamed the skies over King's Landing, their presence both majestic and menacing. Daenerys struggled daily to ensure they harmed as few innocents as possible, yet the rumors of devoured children and scorched caravans persisted, fueled by every new incident. House Brax's near disaster was only one example of how swiftly events could spiral. In the weeks that followed, Aegon remained elusive, sowing occasional confusion with false sightings. Daenerys enlisted every resource to track him, from gold cloaks to Varys' spies, but he might as well have vanished into the Seven Hells. Dorne and the Vale sent letters of cautious friendship, but neither committed to a formal alliance. The Westerlands, aside from Brax, remained watchful, uncertain if they should test the might of the Dragon Queen or bow to inevitability. The small folk of the city, meanwhile, coped as they always had, with a blend of fatalism and hope. Some erected crude dragon effigies in the streets, either to honor or ward off the creatures. Others sold dragon-themed charms, claiming they brought good luck, an echo of the fervor once reserved for the Targaryens of old. Children gazed skyward whenever a dark shape passed, half thrilled and half terrified. The city watch demanded curfews near the docks, lest another child disappear. Yet day-to-day life ground on. People married, quarreled, bartered, and told each other that at least the war was over for now. For Daenerys Targaryen, the burden of leadership weighed heavily. Each morning, she woke to the knowledge that 5 new dragons relied on her for guidance, and that the entire realm scrutinized her every action, waiting for a sign of madness or tyranny. Each evening, she patrolled the castle walls, scanning the horizon for Umbraxes, Orien, or Baratheon, calling them softly to ensure they returned before midnight. Often they did. Sometimes they did not, leaving her anxious until dawn. Rhaenys and Valera remained more reclusive, preferring the familiarity of the subterranean chambers. She made certain to visit them as well, bringing fresh meat and murmuring in Valyrian. And through it all, Varys watched, ever the spider, weaving delicate webs of information, pulling threads to maintain a precarious peace. He wondered, at times, if the realm truly was better off with these newly revealed dragons. The potential for destruction was immeasurable, and yet the presence of an unquestionable power also kept ambitious lords from plunging the kingdoms into another war. Fear, ironically, was the glue that held the realm together in these fragile days. Yet fear is a double-edged sword. In the hidden corners of Westeros, in dark keep cellars and smoky taverns, men who yearned for freedom from that fear began to whisper of ways to slay dragons once more. Old scrolls, old ballista designs, rumored potions, like the fabled Dragonbane, circulated among conspirators. The more the queen tried to reassure them of her peaceful intentions, the more some believed she was merely lulling them into subservience. And though Daenerys dismissed talk of a second rebellion, Varys' little birds heard the ominous undertones. As late summer faded toward autumn, the nights grew cooler. One evening, Daenerys stood atop the repaired battlements of the Red Keep, a heavy cloak draped over her shoulders. She looked out at the city lights below. The wind carried the faint smell of wood smoke from the chimneys, mingled with the salt of the sea. Grey Worm stood a respectful distance behind her. She remembered how, years ago, she had dreamed of taking King's Landing with her dragons, of liberating the people from tyranny. Now she was queen, and yet she felt as though she balanced on a flimsy rope strung between 2 cliffs, one of tyranny, one of dissolution. Umbraxes soared overhead, blotting out the stars for an instant. She lifted her gaze. The black dragon let out a call that resonated with something deep in her heart. She raised a hand, wondering if he saw her. Then she heard a flap of wings from another direction. Orien streaked across the moon's reflection, gold-tipped scales flashing. Baratheon dove in an elegant arc, an emerald comet in the night sky. Rhaenys and Valera must still be below, perhaps stirring in the tunnels, restless. She sighed, remembering how it all began with the faintest rumor, gleaned by Varys in the depths of the Red Keep. The hidden eggs, the young hatchlings who survived in secret. She had never asked him exactly how he first discovered them, nor why he kept it a secret so long. Perhaps she didn't want to dwell on all the what-ifs. What if they'd been found years earlier, raised by someone with crueler intentions? What if they had died in darkness before she arrived in Westeros? Now, they lived, and that was all that mattered. "Your Grace," said Grey Worm quietly, stepping forward. "Are you well?" Daenerys let the silence linger before replying. "I am tired, Grey Worm. The realm is tired, too. We must hold it together somehow, and for that I need the dragons. But the dragons make everything more dangerous. Grey Worm nodded, though he said nothing. He was a soldier, not a politician. He followed orders, and his loyalty to Daenerys was unwavering. If she commanded him to face a dragon, he would do so, but he could not allay her deeper fears. A gust of wind tugged at her cloak. She remained there on the battlements, watching the 3 draconic silhouettes twist and dance amid the stars, guardians or harbingers of a new age. Varys's distant figure could be glimpsed at a lower wall, conferring quietly with a messenger. Tyrion might be in his chambers, drafting letters of reassurance or pleas for calm. Beyond the city, the lords and ladies of Westeros weighed their next moves, wondering if the Targaryen queen truly had the realm's best interests at heart, or if she was only waiting to incinerate them. And the dragons, freed from centuries of extinction, soared like living omens, unstoppable and yet so very vulnerable in the face of human treachery. The entire realm teetered between awe and terror, drawn inexorably toward a future none could fully predict. Daenerys Targaryen, the mother of dragons, stood at the center of it all, uncertain if she was guiding her children, or if they were guiding her. Down in the labyrinth of stone and darkness, Rhaenys and Valera prowled the chambers, half expecting another intrusion from the gold cloaks or from Varys's watchers. They hissed and whispered in dragon tongues, listening to the echoes of their siblings roaring above. One day they might join those nighttime flights more often. One day they might test the boundaries of sky and city. For now, they lingered in the gloom, content to roam the halls that had once been their sole domain, gnawing on bones in the silence. In that interplay of moonlit flight and subterranean gloom, the fate of Westeros churned, ever shifting. The realm had survived the War of the Five Kings, the Night King's threat, the sacking of King's Landing, and so many other cataclysms. Now it faced a more uncertain trial, living with dragons not as legends but as neighbors, beasts both wondrous and deadly. Some would rally to the Queen's banner in awe, others would conspire against her in fear. Alliances would form, betrayals would unfold. And at the heart of it, Varys's fateful choice, to reveal the hidden brood, echoed through every anxious breath of the city. Whether that choice had saved Westeros from a slow decay or doomed it to a fiery reckoning was a question no one, not even the Spider himself, could answer. The time of dragons had arrived once more, and only the gods could say if the realm would endure their presence. Yet Daenerys Targaryen stood defiant on her battered throne, determined to forge a peace amid the roar of wings and the flicker of dragon flame. For better or for worse, Westeros would never again be the same.